at some point, we need grown-up politicians who tell voters the truth about the long-term pressures we face.
If the Chancellor really wanted to make her name, maybe what she should do is a really big bang budget that does address some of these questions.
But she did it in November.
Yeah, but it didn't.
It was 40 billion flipping quid, and the extraordinary thing is, to be honest, I do not believe that we are now in a place where any one budget can reconfigure the public finances in a fundamental way for the long term. The only thing that can deal with this is an honest national debate about the choices that we as a society want to make. And it requires a degree of bold political leadership that I don't think, and we definitely haven't seen in this country probably since Margaret Thatcher. You need a leader who basically is prepared to be A, incredibly unpopular, and B, do some really radical things, recognising that we have these twin problems, and they are the fundamental problems. We are not growing fast enough. And that means with limited resources, you have to allocate those resources specifically to the kind of initiatives that might get the growth rate up. And you might, in the short term, have to say, well, that does mean that there will be less money for, some of the projects that we'd like to have money spent on. But frankly, we're just going to have to make do with a slightly more second-class service in some areas. That's number one. And number two, we are going to have to rethink where you draw the lines of private provision and public provision. And if we're not prepared to have that debate, in the end, British people might decide they want a slow-growing economy funded by very high levels of taxation. But at least let them know that is what they're facing. This fuel duty escalator is written into law. Every single budget, the Chancellor announces that the escalator is not going to be implemented because they're terrified of putting up the cost of petrol for voters, despite the fact that the overwhelming evidence is that that among the measures you could take to encourage people to spew less carbon dioxide and poison into the atmosphere would be to reduce consumption of petrol, put up the price of petrol. Nonetheless, no Chancellor in modern times has had the guts to do that.
20 billion is a lot of money. As I said, kind of things she's obviously going to be thinking about. I don't think she's going to be thinking about wealth taxes. I think she's going to think about, putting fuel duty up. I'm interested to know whether you think that's just too much grief. Is it an idea you discuss and then back off? Freezing income tax allowances, personal tax allowances is an easy way to raise quite a lot of money. It always seems to me to be the least controversial way to raise money from the masses, but maybe you disagree with that.
Sorry, which one?
Freezing tax allowances.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's just because it doesn't come up as a headline that you've increased tax, even though in fact you have. She obviously can't put up income tax. She can't put up VAT because she said in her manifesto that she's not going to do that. What does your nose tell you she's likely to do or where she's likely to look?
My nose tells me that because of their manifesto commitments, which they insist they're going to honour, they will end up doing something messy that will again fight against their growth ambitions. She could do something that was rumoured before the last budget, which was to, for those who are paying higher rates of tax, basically say the tax allowance is now only going to be the basic rate of tax. The problem with that is that people who do not think of themselves as being very high earners, so even senior nurses, senior teachers, head teachers, would have happened because of the technicality of it, they'd suddenly find themselves paying 40% tax for the first time, because the advantage of this system is that it keeps many of those people in the, basically paying the lower rate of tax. The reason the last budget, the Chancellor shied away from doing that was because she didn't want to be seen to be punishing a lot of people who were basically Labour supporters. But there is a more fundamental problem with increasing the taxation that people pay, whether it's on lump sums or whether it's on their contributions, which is, I've just said in the my earlier discourse about how we've got these terrible problems of an ageing society. When you've got an ageing society and you think that state provision through the basic pension, for example, can't possibly keep up with people's needs, you want people to make more private provision. You put taxes up on private pension contributions, and that's not going to happen. Yeah. So this is another example of the long-term needs of society fighting against the Chancellor's need for cash in the short term.